Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Delivering on the returns, increasing our margins.
Ratings go down the toilet if I'm not here.
All I do is simply put the math in my favor.
We agree that Brandon and John do good work.
The reason is simple wrestling economics.
I've been told the Netflix numbers. I've been told the metrics a little bit, probably 5 different times. I still don't get it.
There were respectable wrestling journalists who needed answers.
Thank you very much, members of the media. I hope you all go to hell.
How about we pop a number right here, right now?
Whole part of the show, man.
And here we are, Thursday evening, post-wrestling and Wrestlenomics coming together as we present Pollock and Thurston live from our respective locales of Toronto and Buffalo, where my mini vacation ended 3.5 hours ago, and I quickly got right back into reading. I read some great arguments back and forth by one of the parties that is on this.
Did you read them?
I did. I went through. This was some light reading. 12 pages of legalese of back and forth volleying. What is the public allowed to know? This is what Brandon will be going into a little bit more in detail. We have SummerSlam coming up this weekend. I know Brandon, he wanted to do a whole breakdown of both nights, but we just do not have the time tonight to go through all of the matches between both nights in Minneapolis. First week of WWE Radio. Talk a little bit about that. They scored some big guests this week, including Paul, CM Punk, and Seth Rollins as well. Also, not finding enough time to run down a pay-per-view from last Sunday night. It was a very busy week, of course. So AEW Redemption was left idle on the WWE Radio airwaves. And we have a good old-fashioned op-ed to talk about. Nothing like Ari Emanuel sitting down with a pen and paper to write down about how this merger, it's going to save everybody. Who would have thought that Ari Emanuel would have come to the saving graces of one David Ellison? I'm glad to know that Ari's got David Ellison's back. Like, no financial entanglements here. Just an honest broker in Hollywood sharing his 2 cents without any affiliation to either side.
Well, we'll get into it, but I he's probably right.
Could be right, but don't tell me he doesn't have certain motivations to see this merger go through and for it to be as seamless as possible, as we're now talking about the billions of ticking fees that, I mean, whoever negotiated the ticking fee, I mean, if ever there's a winner in all of this, it's Mr. Zaslav, okay? Does he not always come out of this looking like would he not stand to extract more value for his shareholders? Even in this process, it looks like he's going to provide his shareholders with millions and millions of dollars over the coming months.
He is protecting his shareholders. He is adhering and delivering on his fiduciary duty. He is wearing his sweater vest. He's wearing the shades in Idaho and Sun Valley, pointing at the camera. But yeah, there's a benefit. I think Tony Khan's probably. I want to see the Tony Khan Wall Street Journal opinionated editorial on. I bet he's in favor of this merger being completed.
Well, maybe that will be streamed on MyAEW. We'll see. Let's start off, because a week ago we spoke about the Paramount-WBD issues that were at hand. The next day, Paramount made a pretty stunning announcement that it had agreed to put the merger on hold until either June the 1st of next year or 5 days after these lawsuits are resolved. This coming after 12 attorneys general, led by Rob Bonta in California, had filed an antitrust suit alleging an illegal dominant share of the market that Paramount and WBD would command in both theatrical distribution and basic cable. And as we mentioned last week, the big day to watch here is October the 1st, 2026, because that is when the clock starts ticking. And for every day that this merger is not completed, $7 million is paid by Paramount per day. So if this makes it to June the 1st of next year, we're talking like $1.7 billion that would just be in like late fees. Okay. Like when you forgot to return your video, this is going to be the ultimate late fee if this merger does not conclude by
Do our
October
listeners
the
remember
1st.
that? There are late fees on your video?
I once returned a video that I had lost in my house, and they had the clock ticking for 18 months, and they told me that my late fee was something like $112. And I just simply
They didn't
said,
just arrest you?
you know what? I thought that would be the next step, but I just said, no, I'm not paying this. And they said, well, you can never rent a movie here from Video 99 again. And I said, you know what? Blockbuster just gained a new loyal customer. Bye. And I never walked out in that store again.
I remember Video Factory was another one, at least around here. And of course we had Blockbuster, but I remember you'd rent video games and they would put their store sticker on it. And I think there was like warnings in there about like the FBI will come and like it's a federal crime and all this, probably piracy type stuff. But yeah, I remember it being there was some scary language about criminal charges that you might face.
I was a paranoid kid, and it's the main reason why when I would rent wrestling tapes that I would not copy them. I just thought like I could rent these and just save them, but I was like, they would have to know. There's got to be a way they can monitor this. And I just thought to myself, it was not, certainly as an 8-year-old, I would have been scared of going to prison. But I also thought, like, what a ridiculous reason to go to prison. Like if I said...
You don't go to prison if you're 8 years old.
Well, this is at 8. They scare the shit out of you. You just assume that juvenile hall is it's just one big abyss into prison, and that there I would be in solitary confinement. And what's your crime, sir? I duplicated WrestleMania 8. I mean, could you explain such a crime?
If Dana White is in charge, he will
death
fully pursue the maximum of the law if you're pirating any of his content.
So anyway, that was the big move by Paramount last week of at least acquiescing to these attorneys general about putting a pause on this merger that they were hoping to finalize this month. They just wanted to greenlight this thing as fast as possible. But Ari Emanuel decided enough is enough, and he contacted his favorite paper of choice, the Wall Street Journal. And he argued that the state attorneys general, they're misguided, and wrote, when government officials manipulate markets to reach political outcomes, antitrust stops protecting competition and it starts threatening it. The attorneys general should drop this case and get back to enforcing the laws as they are written. Let Hollywood creatives get back to trying to rip each other's heads off at the box office, in streaming, online, and everywhere else we compete. It's what we're best at.
Mr. Emanuel is executive chair and CEO of TKO, which does business with movie studios.
Yeah. Did you
That's
also...
what they do. They do business.
He also cites the fact that WBD, if this did not go through, they're $29 billion in debt, and they may not be able to invest in films and television, omitting the fact that this Paramount-WBD merger, it's hardly going to be debt-free either. But his parting shot, I am a lifelong Democrat, as are many of my friends and, yes, family. I hear the passionate concerns about CNN and the politics surrounding this transaction. But antitrust law can't be a tool for settling arguments, whether wielded by a Democrat or Republican. Those issues should be debated directly and on their own merits. Signed, Democrat Ari Emanuel.
Yes, he's alluding to his brother, Rahm Emanuel, who maybe is preparing to run for president. I don't know, but he was the mayor of Chicago, right? He was the chief of staff in the White House during a Barack Obama's administration. Yes. So he's discussing quite a bit in here, right? But basically, the data that's in the Nielsen gauge is I Google the Nielsen gauge. If they're updating it, has Nielsen been updating the Nielsen gauge? We're about to find out. Because last I looked, there were some delays. We discussed those delays. What do they have here? May 2026 is the latest they've got here. Usually they're only about a month behind, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, here's a month, it's not dramatically different. It's a little bit different from month to month, but not dramatically. There's a scary note in here that says the gauge and media distributor gauge do not reflect Nielsen's currency TV ratings. Nielsen is working on updates, more updates, to the gauge and MDG to better reflect currency for the fall TV season, at which time we will provide back data to assist in the transition. So things are confusing as they normally are with Nielsen.
Let's also just make mention of the fact we have no affiliation with Nielsen, by the way. We're just
no affiliation with Nielsen whatsoever. If you want to talk to Nielsen, you got to talk to Nielsen. Go to Nielsen.com. So part of what he's getting at here is, right, like, at least in terms of TV watch time, right? And there's another thing down here that they usually do. Yeah. So they have the watch time broken down by company, right? Not just, this is by platform or medium, right? This is broadcast TV, this is cable TV, this is other, and all of this, almost half of it is streaming. And then we have the streaming broken down into various parts. And YouTube is number one. Netflix is number one. After that, half of Netflix is Disney, and so on. But that's a good illustration of what he's getting at, I think. But also, here's the breakdown of that same thing of watch time in May, and it's not going to be dramatically different from month to month. So if you break that down by company, YouTube is the leader. YouTube is consuming 13% of the pie. Who's number two? It's Disney. Okay, it's NBCU plus Versant at 8%. Paramount's only got 8% of this. They're right on par with Netflix. So the point I think he's making is that if you put Warner Brothers and Paramount together, either from a movie studio sense or from a TV network sense, it's not like they're going to be occupying 50% of the market or even, 40% of the market. If you put Warner Brothers Discovery, it's got 6%, but Paramount's got 8%, 6 plus 8, I think is 14. That's a monopoly. That's something that should trigger antitrust concerns. That's, I think, what he's saying there. And in this environment where this is not just traditional TV is being competed with by other traditional TV networks, yes, but it's also being competed with a variety of streaming content that's not on traditional TV. YouTube is this is on television. It's not just on phones. On televisions, YouTube is the leader. YouTube rules the TV.
So the counter argument to that is that for creators, that if they have a film, if they have a series, that YouTube is not going to be necessarily the place that they are going to be going for, and thus they may be the leaders when it comes to watch time, and they certainly can be argued as competitors in that sense. It's for the creators, their concern of, are we losing another studio? Is this just going to be folded? Is Warner Brothers being folded into Paramount, and thus there's one less studio at the table for creators? And this has spurred on as well the Writers Guild Association. They've now filed their own antitrust suit. SAG-AFTRA, they have come out against this merger as well. So that is the argument from the creator side. For Ari Emanuel, though, Ari Emanuel as well in this. Like, he points out the fact that there are other studios that are emerging. He mentions Amazon MGM, A24, Lionsgate, that these are, several studios that have had some really big hits of late as well, that this is not the dire landscape that the attorneys general are painting it.
Mm-hmm. He goes on to write here. So I guess the question, and this is related to a very important question that we often ponder here. Where he writes in here, I want to read this part of his op-ed. The real threat to competition is what happens if the attorneys general succeed. Warner Brothers Discovery ended 2025 with $29 billion in net debt and declining revenue. Does anyone believe it will be able to invest in films and television? More to the point, does anyone believe it wouldn't sell its key assets to companies that aren't committed to theatrical exhibition? What would happen to TNT and TBS? What would happen to AEW if they can't make this deal?
$29 billion is a pretty steep amount of debt to carry. But doing basic math, the estimated amount of debt that Paramount and WBD as a merged entity would hold is $79 billion. So I would counter that to Ari I would be very worried about this Ellison family that it seems as long as Larry Ellison has the purse strings open, this is great. But the second that this guy gets cold feet, and his stock, Oracle's stock, has taken a major plunge over this last year, there would be a lot of concerns here. I think it's, as we always talk about in relation, this is a story that could have big effects, not just on AEW, but the UFC certainly. But it seems like that is so far down the chart of like a trickle down from all of this. But you just naturally, you would have to think that the more that Paramount is forking into this and the amount of days that this continues onward, that they're just plunging $7 million per day, it's just going to intensify how lean this company may have to be if this gets across the finish line and their initial debt is compounded by months of this ticking fee that is going to add upwards of $1 to $2 billion in added fees on top of all of this, with a deadline of early June that this has to be completed by.
So if you're AEW, you're in agreement with Ari Emanuel, I would think.
Yes.
Because you want to see this deal get completed, so this merged entity gets on with its corporate life and then has more money rather than less money to make a TV deal with. Because if they're strapped for cash at the end of this, or if you've got the remnants of WBD by itself and the merger doesn't close, things are going to be even more difficult financially for this surviving entity that AEW deals something like 80% of its revenue with.
Definitely. I think for all parties that have any kind of relationship to Paramount-WBD and their future depends on it, it's settling this at any cost. But there is a lot of leverage that the attorney generals have been able to get out of this, in that this ticking fee, it gives them the ability to stall as much as possible. And as we have seen in many of these legal cases that we have followed, like, stalling is just a huge part of the game, and it becomes much more intense. Not to say that the Ellisons can't stomach this ticking fee, but I don't know of too many people that want to wake up every morning knowing there's a $7 million toll that is due every single day until this thing is finalized.
More on stalling later.
More on stalling to come. All right, let's talk a bit about what is now officially closed, and that is Janel Grant's case. That is kind of ended with a quiet end to what is maybe the most important case that has ever been filed in professional wrestling, because of the ramifications of Vince McMahon permanently being removed from power in WWE. We spoke last week about the fact that they had filed to officially dismiss this case, and it was basically a formality that this has now been moved over to arbitration, and thus the civil case that Janel Grant had filed in January 2024 comes to an end, at least the civil portion of this, with arbitration expected to follow.
Yeah, I think I had said last week that this was filed on the 24th, this voluntary notice of dismissal. And anyway, the judge weighed in here and mooted the pending motions, which were the motion to compel arbitration and the issue around discovery, whether Janel Grant was going to be able to get motion-related discovery on the arbitration question itself. Anyway, Judge Sarah F. Russell filed, I believe this was Monday, the 27th. Yes. The parties have filed a stipulation of dismissal pursuant to Rule 41A1A. 2. Accordingly, the clerk is directed to terminate all pending motions as moot, and the judge did not actually have to, because I went and I read the civil procedure rules. The judge does not have to approve because all the parties had already signed on to the voluntary stipulation that dismissed the case. So this case, as a federal lawsuit, is done with prejudice. It continues in arbitration. We have no evidence to show that Janel Grant has received any money as part of agreeing to move to arbitration. And her claims will be litigated there. In private arbitration, what does that mean? It means we likely don't get to know anything about it.
And therefore, the next steps of this are going to be limited to if there is the announcement of a settlement. I'm sure that will be just publicly announced. But that's beyond any of that. It's like a lot of this is going to be held privately. So there's a lot of reaction to this that focuses right on Vince McMahon, as though this is some kind of a win for Vince McMahon. And in some cases, like it was Vince McMahon and WWE that argued for the venue to be arbitration. This is what they had wanted from the get-go. So in that case, yes, you can look at this as the defendants were able to steer this suit towards the venue that they wanted. But in many ways, I look at Vince McMahon like what would, like, to me, unless it was complete exoneration and somehow proving all of these allegations false, or somehow being able to present some sort of case that can refute all of this, I don't know how you paint any of this as a win for Vince McMahon, that at the end was essentially asked out of his company, away from power. And I think his reputation, I won't say it's been completely destroyed. I think among anyone that has followed the case closely, I would say his reputation it's unrecoverable. But there's enough, I think, public sentiment of people that either did not follow the case or do not care. And Vince McMahon could do no wrong to those people. But I think to the broader community, this has absolutely harmed Vince McMahon's reputation and will be a huge part of the Vince McMahon story when all is said and done.
I mean, Janel Grant's lawsuit and allegations are extremely graphic and horrific. Vince denies everything, of course. With this lawsuit going into arbitration, going into confidential arbitration, presumably, it now joins sort of the merger lawsuit, as that is settled in principle. We have an update on the merger lawsuit that I'm sure nobody else has reported on. We'll discuss that in a minute. But, you know, as the Grant lawsuit is getting wrapped up, I was getting messages, which I think is what you're referring to, of, wait, does this mean Vince is going to come back? Because all of he's got some litigation that he's going through. Does this mean he's going to be able to come back? I don't think the political landscape is probably going to be very inviting for him. I think Ari and Vince are probably close, but I don't think, and it would have to be Ari that would decide to do it, right? I think it certainly doesn't serve Nick Khan's interests or Paul Levesque's interests for Vince to come back in some sort of corporate role in TKO or WWE, right?
A corporate role seems completely out of the question. Nothing is shocking, but to me, the idea though of Vince just being paraded out there for some sort of just one more showcase to the audience. We've mentioned the fact of your Hall of Fame in Saudi Arabia next year. Like, those ideas of using just Vince McMahon to be trotted out there again in front of the audience, that I don't see as a crazy notion in the least.
Paul and Vince were at odds in creative very much towards the end, and our reporting on some of the information that came out from the merger lawsuit reflects on that. As much as I think Nick will give him lip service with words, I don't think Nick would be benefited as he climbed up the Mortal Kombat hierarchy to have Vince back. But yes, none of that means that they wouldn't be willing to bring him out and honor him. I wouldn't rule that out. There is the Ring Boy lawsuit, which is still ongoing. The current status of the Ring Boy lawsuit is that they're arguing over whether, I believe it's the 14th Amendment, whether due process, one of their rights under the Bill of Rights is being violated as part of the Maryland Child Victims Act, whether that's denying the defendants, including Vince, Linda, and WWE, the right of due process. And maybe this gets appealed if they do not get a decision that's favorable to them as part of that. But that is fairly far from over, and it was the lawsuit that was started the latest of these three.
And quite frankly, it's a case that, I mean, just covering this as intensely as we have for the last 2.5 years, both cases, it has given me a perspective on the importance of these cases from filing to, like, all of these places. Like, when you see these cases that are filed, often there are PR firms that are hired, because that's a huge component of this. It's keeping this front and center in the public eye, because you can see that when ultimately these things do fade in the news cycle and there's less and less focus on it. And I think that when you are a real significant public figure, such as a Vince McMahon is, that over time, I think generally the public begins to question things, or the public begins to, they look at the celebrity as such, that this person could not be as is stated in such a lawsuit, or you just lose interest among time of these cases. You don't want to think about these things as being reality, and it's much easier to just believe in the fictionalized versions that you're sold on television, and that is what you default toward. But that's a huge component of all this, is keeping a pressure up, keeping the public's attention on these stories, and that's where they sometimes they get forgotten by people. I would say the Ring Boy suit is one of those that you just hardly hear anyone discuss in any kind of significance at this point.
And Linda McMahon, after all, is the Secretary of Education, and she's a named defendant in that case. I guess there's two very different issues there, in that the court of public opinion, I mean, they are related to some extent, particularly when it comes to settlement pressure. But there's the court of public opinion, and whether or not it can be comfortable enough to bring Vince back for a Hall of Fame thing. And then there's just what's legally viable with this case. I guess with the Grant case in particular, if the Grant case had gotten more mainstream coverage, I don't know that helps her legal case, other than it might put additional pressure onto the defendants to settle. And because that could come with that pressure, that mainstream media attention could come with sponsorship pressure. But that's a big difference in the sort of public attention that it got. But yeah, there's a difference between, like, can you get away with honoring Vince, and what would have caused a different legal outcome here.
Yeah, and I understand. Like, I'm not trying to necessarily equate that one equals the other, but there is the aspect of this that if you are in the case of the plaintiffs, whether you are the former Ring Boys, whether you are Janel Grant, that there's a lot that works against you, from the simple fact of being able to withstand a lawsuit, that you're going to have a legal firm that stands by you for what could be dragged out to be a multi-year process of both of these cases have. And there's also the ability of, like, ultimately my question for Vince McMahon would have been what he sought to gain out of this case. Was it simply to rehabilitate your image to the public? Because if that was the case, arbitration never really made sense here. Was this just a money thing for Vince McMahon to recover the relatively small amount in the grand scheme of things that he had paid?
He's a defendant, though. He didn't file a lawsuit, though. He is not, but in order for him to, like, what is the desire to go to arbitration? Is it just simply to keep this as quiet as possible, to go by what was written in the contract? Like, what was your goals in this whole thing versus offering a settlement right at the get-go? Like, this was always a case that was going to come down to money. That's all this civil case was going to be. So if you're Vince McMahon and you just want this to go away, you could have way back in 2024, but you wanted to fight this and defend it and push it to arbitration. Like, what's the outcome of arbitration? Is your reputation any different? Yeah, and I guess we don't know what communication might have been happening between the respective teams of lawyers in terms of whether there was settlement discussions earlier on or at some other point in this, but certainly not viable enough to settle this earlier rather than later. I think, arbitration is what's used to, if you're Vince McMahon, you're a global celebrity. You are benefited by getting this out of public court and into private arbitration where the allegations cannot be continued to be litigated.
Well, breaking news reporter Eric Bischoff is suggesting that Vince McMahon is privately working on a documentary to get his side out.
Oh.
He is the only person that has spoken of this, so I have no idea if this is... granted, the man's got the money, and the man certainly has the time if he would want to put together...
He has a business, 14th and I, that's private equity and media.
Well, yes. Who would be the talking heads in the Vince McMahon documentary? I don't feel there would be a tough twisting of arms to get people to speak glowingly of Vince McMahon in 2026.
No. And speaking of, WWE Radio launched this week.
That is true, folks. Sirius, channel 156. Last week, everyone was asking that big question. It was like, is anything going to change?
No!
And 24 hours after that heated rebut of anything changing, Thunder Rosa gone from Busted Open Radio after 4 years. And then Monday morning, the official launch of WWE Radio. Just hours after AEW Redemption, well, it turns out that all hosts of WWE Radio, unfortunately, did not have access to the AEW pay-per-view, and thus it was...
Can you call in? Do they take calls on this channel?
I don't know if they were taking calls on any of these shows. I will fully state I am not a Sirius XM
There's
subscriber.
A phone number. There's a phone number here. Looks like a toll-free number.
All I can go on is the comments I have seen on anything related this week. I mean, these hosts have just been excoriated by fans over this decision. And listen, I think it's one where it's funny because Paul Levesque is on there and they're talking about like the product and how, there's fans that they're passionate and they talk about what they love, they talk about what they hate, and this is the forum for that type of thing. It's like, that's exactly what you have done here. Like, you have fostered a certain following here of your most rabid fans that would listen. And it's not even to say that, this was like the NPR of pro wrestling radio beforehand. I mean, this was something like they were at Fanatics Fest recently. They have had presence on WWE pre-shows. Like, this is hardly something like this is a giant departure from the sort of tone you would get. But you are telling your audience now, just frankly, we aren't going to talk about AEW any longer. And I think it's just the idea of the optics of this and telling your audience, we will no longer talk about this subject. This is now the forbidden subject on these airwaves, which is when you see something as WWE Radio, yeah, but you're not launching something fresh in WWE Radio that people would just expect this to be WWE only content. You're taking an existing brand that did branch out and cover all of these other topics. So I think like that backlash is to be expected of your audience that you are doing this.
I saw this comment, this post on Reddit that I have to read. Unfortunately got downvoted. The question is W Radio replacing Pro Wrestling Nation 24/7 to control the narrative? With the dwindling opinion of W under TKO Online, I think it's more than a coincidence that WWE announced that Pro Wrestling Nation 24/7 is being replaced by a radio station with WWE branding. I haven't had Sirius XM in months, but if WWE Radio doesn't cover anything outside of WWE AAA TNA bubble, then it is obviously a move to control the public opinion. What do you guys think?
Wow, man, that's some Oliver Stone level conspiracy there. I mean, I wouldn't want to peddle in that type of thought here. I'm sure they just saw the idea that, hey, this is just a great branding exercise for all of us to just leverage the WWE brand and fully...
We're not afraid to pound our chest about it.
I mean, you can
He
just
should
close off the
guest
universe.
number one.
He should have. They wouldn't know who he is, though. You have to close off the universe of AEW talk. I mean, clearly, like that's a benefit of running on the days that AEW runs their pay-per-views to the extent that WWE runs their head-to-head competition. I think I can only speculate that it's born out of, a Nick Khan attentiveness to the sports media, and if we can just sort of drown them out, that's good for us.
Is it fair that, I mean, mainly it seems to be like, you have your Bully Rays and Mark Henrys and such, the ones that have Nick Nemeth with TNA, but it seems like Dave LaGreca has gotten, from my vantage point, the lion's share of the criticism. Is that fair? Is that warranted? Like you are a public face of this, and he is not the one that is necessarily making this decision, but like I kind of feel like you had to have expected this criticism, and he didn't do himself any favors with the nothing is going to change line that everyone focused on when you absolutely knew that WWE Radio is going to be presented a certain way.
Is that fair?
No!
I walked right into that one. Well timed. I think it's one where you have to look at this, and it's one where for WWE, I mean, it's right within the playbook, and now they basically have their own Sirius channel. And I guess the larger question is, are there going to be more changes that they make over this time? Like, what is to stop them from, inserting like the you go ahead.
I think I was going to say Sean Rossap, I think, had a good summary of it. I think he posted on Fightful Select that, this is what's going to happen, that they're going to say that nothing has changed at first, and maybe they'll kind of, say some things that test the waters. But then as time goes on, they'll be more and more centric and more favorable to WWE. At first, maybe there'll be some WWE criticisms, but then as time goes on, it will become very pro WWE. And then eventually the deal will run out and things will go back to the way they were before, which was, by some people's perception, already quite pro WWE.
Do you think that could be... I don't know if you necessarily can go back at that point, nor do I think...
It's a deal that has a termination date, and maybe it'll be renewed, maybe it won't. Right,
yes. Yeah, I don't know. It's certainly one where, like, listen, I can understand that you have two options here. You either continue under this new banner, or like you leave your job. Like those are basically the two options that you have. But to expect that this is going to be like, a lot of it felt like this is going to be this big pat on the back, and I think that would be a misread of a good portion of your audience. Not all of them. Like there's many who, great, no more AEW that I have to listen to, no more New Japan. But there's going to be a sizable amount that it's not even so much the fact that it is like these are AEW fans. It's just the idea that these voices, they have been restricted in terms of what they can talk about. And a major topic has now been removed from them. And it's not by their own decisions. It is a decision from above. And that's just naturally going to, I think, elicit that anger from an audience base.
You know what this is like? This is like if the NFL like bought into ESPN and had control of ESPN.
Well, that's crazy.
That's what's happening too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, concussions no longer exist.
Tonight, do they talk about
on SportsCenter?
Do they talk about what's the alternative? UFL?
Well, they don't spend too much time on non-NFL properties. We did get Paul Levesque on Busted Open Radio this week, and he did give this one comment that I wanted to get your reaction to, and this is him being asked about house shows and where they are when it comes to live events.
The live events are so important for getting the reps and moving things forward, right? It's why we're making a concerted effort to, especially in NXT, even just to get them more reps. There comes a time when the physicality has increased so much in our business that you're trying to draw this line between well, are guys being on the road all the time, is that beneficial to their development, or is that just putting mileage on them?
Right.
I think it's the argument in football, right? Like, do we practice full contact? Do we put pads on in practice and play the game, or do we walk through it and do the movements? And is that really teaching them the football? Football. It's such a man. There's a dilemma, and I don't know the answer. I think they shouldn't go away totally. I'm old school. I believe that you learn this craft.
So I think I have the perfect remedy for those clamoring for more house shows, but the reality of not wear and tear on all these guys' bodies. You pay for your ticket. It's maybe at a lower cost than going to TV or pay-per-view, and you get to watch the run-throughs of the matches. Okay, they just come to the ring, they just go through their spots, and they just do a run-through of what you're going to see on TV, maybe at a future date. That is the new house show.
No, I mean, I do think it is really important that people wrestle and get experience. You have to wrestle to become a better wrestler. And if you're only wrestling like 24 times in a year, your development is going to be that much slower than if you wrestled 100 times a year. And he's laying out what the dilemma is there. The more you wrestle, the more likely you are to get injured. It's just a matter of, drive on the road a lot, you're more likely to get in an accident versus if you don't. Just thinking over the last few years, like they have done some things to address this in terms of, I would suggest maybe a large part of the solution could be running or having people have matches that you don't necessarily pay to hold, whether that's partnering with TNA and putting some of your talent over there, buying AAA. Well, you are paying for that, I guess. Or remember Noah? What remember Omos was in Noah?
I mean, you do have Yuka Sasaki is still over in NXT. He's never on TV, but there's at least some bit of a relationship with Noah, but certainly not the level of talent exchange that maybe they could be exploiting a lot more at a time when, God, there are just all these numbers now on the main roster, and the NXT roster is expanding so much that you could certainly afford to isolate 6 or 7 people and send them off for a couple of months that could require that. I would imagine that these are a lot of discussions that come up, and you have to think about the people that are having these discussions, that Paul Levesque would probably be the most senior quote-unquote wrestling person that could convey the value of house shows versus looking at them as simply creating the scarcity model that Mark Shapiro has spoken about, that by eliminating house shows, it's created this higher demand because these are select events that only are going to happen in your city maybe once a year, and it's a big deal when WWE comes to town, and we're not going to the C-towns anymore to wrestle in front of 4,000 people.
I mean, AEW wrestlers are allowed to work indies.
And some do, but a lot don't.
Yes. Is it a crazy thing to suggest that maybe you let some of these NXT talents and maybe even some lower level main roster talents take approved indie bookings? It's experience, and you're not paying for it. Well, you're not paying to hold the event is what I'm getting at. I don't know if you pay the wrestler to have the match, but
yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly like a class of WWE talents that would greatly benefit from it. The
risk is that you have a Roger Jackson incident on one of these events, which was with a promotion that had one of those new partnerships, right, with WWE.
Right. This was the Knox Pro Group that was affiliated with Rikishi. There's also, I mean, for the AEW side, as we speak about it, like, yes, there are like your Megan Baines, and you can go. There's plenty of talents that still do indies, but for others as well, it's, man, if I get hurt on an indie show, it's like that and then I'm out for 6 months. For some, it's just not going to be worth the risk of I'm going to an independent show, and it's like, man, I'm on TV already. I've got a great contract. Like, what is my immediate incentive to be going out and doing indies where, the idea of going out there and getting your reps in, like, that's all well and good. But when you're making very good money, it's not all of these people want to go backwards when I've made it to TV and I don't want to be going on the weekends to go work independent. So it's going to be different for different people and where they are in their stages of their careers and what their goals are. Some do not want to go to Japan for 6 months when they're working for a company over here and making really good money.
Yeah, there would have to be a financial incentive or a requirement or both.
We also had one that is making its way to the Soundboard Hall of Fame. It was populated last week by one busted open submission, but we are going to add another one. This an all-timer for Brandon Thurston fans from our friend Paul Levesque.
The badge of legitimacy of what we do is just what we do.
The badge of legitimacy of what we do is just what we do.
You know, I was watching the WNBA All-Star game this past weekend. We won't get into any of the WNBA controversies, don't worry. And it was in Chicago, and they had this logo. I took a picture of it and almost sent it to you. But it said "What We Do" as they went to commercial break, and I thought, trademark. Has Paul not trademarked that?
He can't be unaware that this is one of his great verbal tics that is impossible not to notice. And when he drops in lines like this, I almost wonder if he's ahead of the game. Pardon the pun on all of us. He's just dropping little lines like that. Okay, let's move on to SummerSlam this weekend. 2 nights at US Bank
While
Stadium.
you introduce this, I'm going to refresh.
Okay, you go refresh because we are going to be at US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis, Minnesota for 2 nights. This is the second year in a row that they have done the 2-night concept for SummerSlam. Last year's was a pretty big success where they were in East Rutherford, New Jersey. They got, Brandon will correct me if I'm wrong, but $7.1 million in incentives / FIPs. This was last year's SummerSlam, Brandon, in New Jersey, a very rich deal that they had to go to the state of New Jersey.
That's right.
This year, we do not know figures, but what we do know is that attendance-wise, this seems like it's going to be quite the drop-off year over year from SummerSlam. WrestleTic's latest numbers have night 1 at 33,740, night 2 32,658. Take that, Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns, as night 2 quietly in the shadow of night number 1. Also, for the first time in several months, there's not going to be any hour of programming on ESPN in advance where they have carried the first hour of the show. There's no window this weekend. But in the biggest news of all for SummerSlam, Brandon Thurston will have access as a YouTube TV subscriber to now purchase ESPN Unlimited, correct? Or you will have access to ESPN Unlimited?
I heard this. I think Neil Flanagan broke this news to me at postwrestling.com. I have not experimented for myself yet, but that is the news here, that YouTube TV subscribers, which is probably like the number 2 pay TV carrier in all the land these days. So this is maybe just under 20 million homes, something like that, which out of 120 million homes, 20 out of 120. So that's a big step. We're also YouTube Premium subscribers. So if you get YouTube without the ads, you're getting Peacock. So you can watch
Saturday night's main event.
And Saturday night's main event, that's right. At no added cost next year. Great. But yeah, they're slowly getting it together here. Rich Greenfield, very excited. Ingestion for the win, he said. So happy for Rich. He's having a good time there. But yes, this is it's different in every region of the country what carrier you have access to, whether it's Comcast or Charter or whatever. So gradually, this is what they always intended, was for everybody to be able to get this as part of their pay TV package if you normally get ESPN.
Yes, because we are coming up on a year since they launched with WrestlePalooza, which as of now has not been announced for this year. After Mark Shapiro had described WrestlePalooza.
Mark said it was,
said it was going to be a big new annual tentpole for them. He loved the name WrestlePalooza. Yes. I mean, what a great name.
I bet Paul Heyman convinced him that it was his idea. This was one conversation with Mark Shapiro. He probably convinced him that would be a great idea that you came up with.
Sir, might I suggest barely legal? They might think it's porn.
Yes.
So, yeah, I guess for SummerSlam this year, it's, looking at anytime you have in excess of 30,000 people for both nights, as well at WWE pricing, it will certainly be successful nights. But like WrestleMania, it does feel as though 2026 is not operating at the level of 2025 kind of peak numbers when it comes to its interest. Looking at TickPick, the get-in price for each night is around $40 to $50, so it is not it's not the hottest ticket for Minneapolis this weekend with the 2-night event.
Yeah. So if we look at what we had on the screen last week in terms of projecting or estimating where this would end up, we had 37 last week for Sunday, and now it's just slightly lower based on just the development of what WrestleTix is estimating. So looking at around 36 each day, whereas we had 36 and 37 last week based on the progression up to that point.
Do we have a updated projection for All in London?
Of course we do. That's the one everybody has anxiety about. And last week, the projection was 46. Whoa. Based on, at that time, the latest count was 32,000. But this week, the formula is even more biased in favor of AEW. It's shilling even more for Tony Khan. 48 now. Maybe you could argue against the math here and say, look, this pop that they got, which I understand coincides with the announcement of the Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay match, maybe that's eating away at some of the jump that you'll see later, and maybe it won't make it to 48 because that seems quite lofty. I remember doing this math a couple weeks ago, and we were, 40 seems reasonable based on the trajectory that they're at now. They're, the math is saying 48. I would not. I would guess that that's a little high. 35 is the current last estimate. This math is mine. The estimates, of course, are those of WrestleTix.
One successful event that WWE does have scheduled for Las Vegas is the first night of TripleMania, which is going down on September the 11th. Now, originally, they had booked this for the Luxor in Las Vegas, which is about a 1,700-seat venue, and they immediately sold it out. And if you go onto the secondary market, the cheapest ticket to get into this event, $607. So this was a case of they greatly underestimated the demand here, where you'd have to spend $600 to get a ticket on the secondary market. So they have now moved it from the Luxor to the much larger MGM Grand Garden Arena, which I believe for pro wrestling they can, depending on the staging area, you'd be talking around 13,000, 14,000 people, and they will be doing an on sale for that. So, I mean, it's quite the leap going from 1,700 to potentially 13,000, 14,000, but this is sort of the AAA audition in Vegas, where I think the idea is just to get important eyes on this show and, continue to chase after that elusive U.S. rights deal for AAA. But certainly I think they were way too conservative with this Luxor booking and, the tickets being snatched up instantly.
Yeah, I mean, AAA seems to be working out fairly well for WWE, I would say. If you don't want, let's put the authentic questions aside. I mean, economically, this seems to be working out, and it provides this sort of mixing of talent and allowing your base W talent to get experience elsewhere, greatly overperforming what they expected here. So TripleMania is multiple nights still. I see night 2 is in Ciudad de Mexico on Sunday. This is not going against an AEW show, I understand. Is that true?
This is what AEW should plot a show here in Vegas that weekend.
This should team up with CMLL and run T-Mobile.
That would be some counter programming. So you will get TripleMania in Vegas on the Friday night. The Saturday is the TKO Boxing, co-promoted event with Golden Boy with Ryan Garcia, who many people got to learn who is Ryan Garcia this past Monday on Raw. And let's go Google Ryan Garcia. Does this guy have any horrific statements in his past? Oh, he does when he takes on Conor Benn.
Google Ryan Garcia tweet.
Yeah, that's one thing. But hey, what a crossover! What a get for them on Raw.
Yeah, I mean, if you're shareholder value is important, and boxing is great, and people say things sometimes, but you work with them anyway, though.
So then we have MyAEW that today announced the addition of 6 new promotions to the streaming group. We have the Ultimate Wrestling Network, Metroplex Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Eve, Rev Pro out of the UK, WXW, and AML/WrestleCade Entertainment. Brandon, number one, have you wrestled for any of these groups in the past? For full disclosure.
Is United Wrestling Network
I think that's Dave Marquez's group.
I did, like in 2020, do like a consulting thing for them. Yeah.
Okay. Never
But
took
no
any
wrestling.
bookings with Metroplex?
No.
So these agreements will cover a mixture of archive.
Oh, I did wrestle for Limitless once. So Limitless is on here.
Yes. Okay. It's a lot of logos that are now populating the MyAEW main page. But yes, this will consist of archived matches, new full-length events, and live pay-per-view streams. And they're really upping the pay-per-view quotient on the streaming service. They're going to be airing 3 CMLL cards as pay-per-views over the next few weeks, including tomorrow night's Leanda de Plata's show, which is the finals of that. And then next Tuesday, it's a CMLL AEW combined show the night before Grand Slam Mexico. And then next week's CMLL Grand Prix as well. There's Produce coming up, WXW, Death Before Dishonor. They're going to offer that. So I guess you can get it if you're on Honor Club, or you can buy it on MyAEW. They're also going to put a free live stream of the house show they recently did, Brawl in the Ballpark, Eve, Rev Pro. So, it's certainly a service that they are rapidly expanding with all the additions of these independent companies. And as expected, like, it is just pretty much replacing Triller in the marketplace.
Yeah. A new Triller lawsuit alleging that Triller somehow, through some shell companies, stole somebody's SpaceX stock. I sent you that. That's a real lawsuit that's out there in federal court in the Eastern District of New York. This is looking a lot like what they might do. It's kind of what my question was 2 media calls ago to Tony Khan about whether you would use MyAEW to broadcast all of your sort of WrestleMania week-like events leading up to your big pay-per-view, and that's already what they're doing for All In, and I think his response was in that neighborhood as well. But if they were to do something next year, sort of the domestic replacement for WrestleMania in terms of the gathering of indie events, could be something like this as well.
And he did mention the AEW podcast network that is in development as well.
That's always been like on the app, right?
Has it been on the app? I think they are.
I think it has, yeah.
Well, that is all to come in AEW land. But we're going to finish off with 2 topics here of the legal variety. First of all, we got the plaintiffs filing a letter in court in the WWE merger case, and Brandon can take us through that as well, as we will segue over to the latest in his 3rd challenge in the merger suit and how things are going, as he has about a dozen or so pen pals that he corresponded with.
Oh, more than a dozen. Much more than a dozen.
It's quite the scroll going through all these names with letters next to their names.
That's who was CC'd. So the merger lawsuit is over with, right? Right?
Yeah,
right?
They told me a month ago that this is done. No need to come to Delaware.
Well, it's settled in principle. What does that mean? That means we've got some terms that we're probably going to agree to. I'm sure there's something much more precise than that. Anyway, something appeared on the docket.
It's always a dangerous term. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So something appeared on the docket today from one of the plaintiff attorneys. Now, this case was settled in principle just before it was set to go to trial in early June. The trial was canceled. More on that trial cancellation later. But one of the plaintiff attorneys filed this letter to the judge today that says, I write on behalf of the plaintiffs. to request a status conference. They want a conference to get all the parties together, the attorneys, and talk, to request that the court issue a final deadline for filing settlement papers. So the settlement is not completely drafted. Well, it's probably drafted, but it's not agreed to. So she says, as Your Honor knows, the trial, it was canceled. The court thereafter took it off the calendar. In nearly 2 months since the trial was scheduled to begin in early June, plaintiffs and defendants counsel negotiated drafts of both a term sheet and a settlement stipulation. The paper process has been unnecessarily arduous. After pivoting from a term sheet to a settlement stipulation, which I guess is a different kind of document, both sets of defendants, because remember there's the Nick and Paul set of defendants, and then there's the Vince single set of defendants. Both sets of defendants have provided comments to the draft, which plaintiffs have accepted. As of yesterday, counsel for defendant Vincent K. McMahon confirmed he was prepared to sign and file the current stipulation of settlement with the court. We don't know how much money it is, but he's agreed. He's willing to agree to it. Vince is good. Even though counsel for the remaining defendants already approved edits, they refused to authorize filing, the plaintiff says. Nor have they indicated, despite multiple requests to do so, what outstanding issues remain. Our best understanding is that the only holdup relates to internal defense side matters beyond the settlement terms themselves. It goes on here, but basically the plaintiffs are saying, Vince is good, we're good, we've got terms hammered out here, but the WWE side, that's the Nick, Khan, Paul, Levesque, George Barris, Michelle Wilson side, are, according to them, refusing to authorize the final terms for reasons they cannot figure out.
Well, I was looking for a good line here, but I don't have one. What do you feel is the holdup on the WWE side to not just simply move on from this? Like, certainly this was going to be a very troubling case, especially from Nick Khan's point of view.
I can only speculate. Maybe it has something to do with amount of money, indemnification, insurance coverage, things we've been discussing in terms of how this settlement was going to be paid for, assuming it's probably going to be into the hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe on the low end. Now that they're going to settle, it's not going to be on the, they were asking for originally $1 billion, as that was the ceiling of what they were arguing for. But I can only speculate. So that's what that is. The plaintiffs are asking for a deadline for everybody to get their papers in and they want to have a status conference so that everybody can talk in front of the judge and figure out why the defendants, the D&O defendants, the WWE defendants are not agreeing to this.
Is there anything that could, does this seem alarming in any way?
Probably not, but it's something to keep your eye on, I think. Like I said, it could come down to some sort of boring, but nonetheless money-related matter. But I have no idea.
Your latest challenge, why was today significant, and what can you share regarding your challenge?
Today was the day. Well, let's back up. How much time we got here? Well, so I filed 3 challenges in the merger case. My third challenge was filed on July 13th, and it challenges not only things that are on the docket that are sealed, but controversially, things that are not on the docket, but have nonetheless been used. And that word used is going to become very important. So I challenged most everything that we didn't already have that was used, that is cited in the pretrial briefs. The pretrial briefs are these very long documents right before trial that the plaintiffs and the defendants each filed, where they cited hundreds of exhibits, many of which we've never seen, but they cited them, referred to them, quoted them, things like that, and they cited them by their JX number, by their very specific identification number. And we do have a corresponding joint exhibit list that gives us a very brief description or title of what this exhibit is, and they're using it in the pretrial brief. Pretrial briefs are basically like opening arguments, but just written down on paper instead of stood up and spoken in a court. So hundreds of these, many of which we've never seen before, were cited in the pretrial briefs for both the defendants and the plaintiffs, And so my third notice of challenged some things before then that are on the docket and still sealed or redacted, but also most all of these exhibits and deposition transcript pages that we don't have access to yet. And I argue that the public does have a presumptive right of access to get these materials. The defendants have pushed back on this and said, we don't think that the right of access applies here because there was no trial. There was no trial. There's no trial record for you to request access to, even though they cited all these materials. So lots of wrangling happened, and we agreed that we would file letters today, 5 p.m. So 4:30 approached. Nobody's filed their letter yet. 4:35 approaches. I finally hit send on my letter. I file it. Once you know it, their letter shows up about 7 minutes later. So we have both filed these letters. Neither of these letters are on the docket, but I have been served their letter. I have my letter. Presumably these are going to be approved in the morning, and then they'll be public. I don't think there's any problem with discussing them now, though. So you've read these both, I think.
Yes.
We can talk about Leo Investments till we're blue in the face. We can go through, I don't know, what I've said a lot of this already in my notice of challenge, trying to preempt the notion that we don't have a right of access to these materials, because Leo Investments, which is this precedent, which is this decision that Vice Chancellor J. Travis Lasser himself, who is the judge in this case, ruled on last year, September, where it concerned many issues as it relates to the rule that governs these challenges. But one, among other things that it decided, was that citation of pretrial and post-trial briefs constitutes use in this context, and therefore the public has a right of access to these things. In addition to that, and quite importantly, in this case in particular, in the W merger case, the plaintiffs and defendants came together and they negotiated this joint pretrial order. The joint pretrial order, if you're still awake, I'll show it on the screen. Well, I'll show where I quote it on the screen. The joint pretrial order says that only those non-deposition transcript exhibits on the joint exhibit list that are used at trial or cited in a party's pretrial or post-trial brief or argument shall be lodged as exhibits, yada, yada. They become part of the public record. So that's concerning the non-deposition exhibits, just the documents, let's call them. But then as to depositions, look at another part of the pretrial order that, again, the parties themselves negotiated, where it says those portions of deposition transcripts used at trial, cited in a party's pretrial or post-trial brief, shall be deemed admitted into evidence and part of the record. So that's not just case law. This is an order that's specific to this case. And then we could go on where the defendants, that is the attorneys representing Vince and the Nick and Paul defendants, come together and they said right there, as everybody remembers in paragraph 291, deposition transcripts should be filed in accordance with Rule 5C3 such that only the portion of the deposition transcript used in open court or in a party's pre or post-trial briefing needs to be filed. So
post-trial briefing is like, this is all going to come down to some very minute language that they are the side that is going against Brandon's challenge is stating the fact that in this Leo Investments, it stated that only after the trial would this be accessible. And they're trying to really place the emphasis on that.
Okay. So this is where, obviously I'm the one that's arguing this, but they're very much taking that only at the end of trial out of context. I mean, at the conclusion of trial is the full, we're going to really get boring here. I'm sorry. At the conclusion of trial. So I'll show that this is the case law that they're referencing here, where it says here, the parties, so this is concerning a different case, but it sets a precedent that is supposed to be filed by other cases in this court. The parties opposing access argued that the right of access does not extend to trial exhibits that were listed but never used. Not under the mechanism, this is the judge speaking, not under the mechanism for admitting evidence that the parties adopted in the case. The pretrial order stated that the conclusion of trial, The exhibits were admitted into evidence, subject to any rulings by the court and with the parties' objections preserved. At the conclusion of the trial, therefore, the exhibits became part of the record and potentially accessible. This opinion by Vice Chancellor Laster addresses a number of issues. What's being addressed in that passage is ProPublica trying to get access to evidence that had never been used. Mm-hmm. And the judge is saying there, okay, but at the end of the trial, according to the order that they agreed to, and I entered into this case, at the conclusion of trial, even the stuff that wasn't used, you get access to. I'm not even going that far. There was no trial. I'm asking only for things that were cited, which is, for these purposes, according to other quotations from this opinion, citation is use. These things, these exhibits and deposition transcript pages, were cited.
Are you saying you could have ammunition to demand even more based on legal precedent from this?
No, that's not what we're saying. Because this Leo Investments versus Tamales Bay Capital case had its own order, had its own pretrial order. It went to trial, it concluded trial, and then at the conclusion of trial, even everything that wasn't used but was nonetheless on the list, public access emerged at that point. That it's a non-issue for this instance. And although I've made a request against many exhibits, my challenge in that sense is more conservative, or is earlier in the process. It's a lower threshold, if you will. We should give the other side their due here,
they outline, I mean, they make like 3 points in this about the pretrial information was never filed with the court, never presented at trial, never relied upon in a judicial decision, and was not otherwise used in the proceeding. Goes on to say that discussing filing, rather, the parties' pretrial briefs merely previewed the evidence that the parties planned to, but did not use at trial or otherwise file with the court. So, like, they are trying to paint a picture here that none of this was like they are minimizing kind of the utilization of this information, and also, again, leaning on this Leo Investments, that the timing was not set forth in the Leo Investments pretrial, nor is it set forth in the PTO here. Rather, it was determined by the court based on similar language in this actions PTO, and calls this Thurston argues that the public needs these unsubmitted, unfiled materials to evaluate the fairness of the court settlement approval process and better understand the facts of this action. Neither argument supports Thurston's broad demand.
So that's a separate argument, and it's irrelevant to what is at this point a threshold issue. They're pushing back against a threshold issue about whether I can even challenge the materials that I've challenged. Now, if you want to say there's if you want to say that there's a particularized harm that someone will suffer that outweighs any public interest, that's an argument you can make on a motion to maintain confidential treatment after I've challenged something. That's not the stage that we're at here. That's not the juncture. That's not the crossroads that we're at here. That's perhaps later. They're certainly entitled to file a motion to maintain confidential treatment. Now, as I wrote to them an email earlier, which is part of a public filing, the notion that they raise about how there are many filings that are already here, we could read part of exactly what they say. The policy argument ignores that the parties must demonstrate the settlement's fairness, and subject to Rule 5.1, the public will have access to the record. The public can also fully understand this dispute given the expansive public record available on the docket, including the pretrial briefs themselves. A granular review of confidential discovery materials the parties plan to submit to the court as evidence, but ultimately do not, is not necessary for the public to understand this case. So what they're saying there is, look, there's already a ton of stuff on this docket that the public can have access to. And I did not address this in the letter, but I did address it to them in email, which is public and on the docket. That is irrelevant to the threshold question. We're not doing a balancing test here about whether public interest or particularized harm, which they're not asserting, by the way, whether particularized harm is outweighed by the public interest. It's just not an issue that's relevant to the dispute we're having.
Yeah, I you would understand it a lot more than me, but I was expecting more so of maybe, as you mentioned, like this argument will be presented down the road, but like I would have thought like their pushback would be less so on kind of just getting into like semantic arguments about this language versus like some specific reason to kind of firewall this information and presenting, that this would in some way cause harm or in some ways make this more than simply that. Like it feels like a semantic argument, but one that, I mean, they might not be playing all their cards here in terms of where this goes, because maybe they feel this is a sufficient enough reasoning that Judge Laster will side with them. Is there any kind of clock on any of this? Like what is the next step after these letters have been submitted to the judge?
On this issue, it's now with the judge, and he can take as long as he wants to make a decision. Just like every decision that any judge makes, they get to take as long as they want. Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a textual argument in that there's this order that the parties negotiated and agreed to. These are sophisticated parties. These are not pro se litigators like me. No. These are some of the best attorneys in the country and in the state of Delaware. Local counsel and lead counsel, Latham Watkins. If it's criminal, what does he say? Latham Watkins, Kirkland Ellis. These are the two of the best law firms in the country, as well as their very specialized Delaware counsel attorneys. If they want, I argue, yeah.
I was going to say there are 14 names here. Only one does not have Esquire next to their name. I'll let everyone guess.
One. I did see that. They CC everybody and they say Esquire next to all the lawyers, and they did not. Of course, for me, because that's appropriate. But so there is one condition where they say we're going to update the joint exhibit list, and we need to have it updated by or at the latest on the first day of trial. So I argue that if they wanted to have us language in the pretrial order that said, all right, we can cite exhibits in the pretrial brief, but they won't become part of the public record until the trial commences. If they wanted to write something like that, they could have, but they didn't.
I think that you have a really sound argument, but I'm going to sound as though I'm just backing your argument here. But in reading them, I mean, the language tends to favor your argument, and just given other,
let's and it's not just that. It's Leo Investments has this precedent where and this is the same judge, by the way. This is
well, that's what I was going to say, is that just looking based upon what Laster has argued in the past, it certainly seems that he leans more towards the public knowing more rather than less.
So Leo Investments confirmed, this is from my letter, Leo Investments confirmed that, quote, under Rule 5, use triggers a filing requirement, and filing brings the relevant portion within the right of access. I quote some more elsewhere that I think is important. Citation is used in this context, I wrote. Leo Investments explained that, quote, the parties used the exhibits by citing them, end quote, and that right of public access, quote, attached once the parties used, this was in this case, the pretrial order exhibits by citing them. So if you cite them, the public has a presumptive right of access to them. Now, you can redact everything, and we can argue about whether everything should remain redacted or not on a motion to maintain confidential treatment. But that's a subsequent process. That's not for this juncture.
Well, we have given everyone a reason to wake up bright and early tomorrow and check the docket, and you can read these 12 pages of letters, which we will give Brandon the most efficiency using 995 words. The response, only 990. He used those.
There's a word limit. We were letters under a certain court rule. You're limited to 1,000 words in this form of filing. Yes.
All right. That brings an end to the show. So I want to thank everyone for joining us and going through all the topics. We will be back. Will we be back next Thursday?
I hope so.
That's the plan. We have a Monday night earnings call next week.
Is that next week?
It is Monday, I believe. I believe it's
August
August 3rd. August 3rd is both the TKO earnings call and it is the hearing for Paramount and WBD's merger squabbles with Rob Bonta and company as well. So a very busy day, August the 3rd. All right. That's it for us, folks. You can, of course, go to postwrestling.com or Wrestlenomics.com. If you want to go the extra step, if you want to be able to assist Brandon in his 995-word challenges, you can go to patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. Help support independent journalists in this industry. Wrestlenomics.com and Wrestlenomics.substack.com as well. Over at Post Wrestling, you can catch all of our latest work. We have our ongoing G1 podcast happening on the cafe. And today, Wei Ting sitting down with Bruce Lord for a near 2-hour retrospective on Akira Hokuto. A great retrospective on her career as well. So you can check out all of that fine work, and we will speak with you next Thursday. Goodbye.